Welcome to Stories in Time. I'm your storyteller, Ellouise Schoettler. I was thinking about what to talk about today, what story to tell you, and I'm just drawn to one of my childhood stories, and I'll tell you why. I was just down in South Carolina telling stories down there for the past 10 days, and I was also with my sisters. And it's very hard to come back from being in your home place where your roots are and with your siblings without being overflowing with memories and stories from the past. So that's what I'm going to tell you today. The story about my dad. My dad, Memorial Day's coming up, and I'm proud of the fact that my dad was in World War II in the U.S. Army Air Corps. He was a crew chief stationed in India at a place called Shamshrinagar Air Force Base. It's on the border now. It's of India and Pakistan. Today it's in Pakistan. And they were the last hands to touch the planes before they flew over the dangerous hump to deliver cargo into China. Well, when he came home, our life changed a little bit, a lot. My mother had been left with 3 children, 3 girls. I'm the oldest, then my middle sister Linda, and then Kathy, the younger one. And we had moved to a 2-bedroom apartment, 814 Hawthorne Lane in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was in a 12-family building. It was easier for Mama, and it kept her surrounded by people, mostly women, because all the men were gone in those days. Well, it seemed to us almost like overnight after the war was ended that the men came back, and things changed in the Virginia apartments at 814 Hawthorne Lane. There was now a man in almost every one of those apartments because the soldiers, the Navy personnel, whoever had been in the service had returned. And those apartments felt smaller than they had when Daddy wasn't there. That was a challenge, and everybody was facing it. There was a housing shortage. People didn't have the money to just rush out and buy a house now that they were back from the war. They had to first find a job and get resettled and reorganize themselves and their families. Well, what it meant was that the parents often had to be very challenged and challenging to come up with things to do to keep their children happy on the weekend in such a small space. I remember very well one of those weekends. Now, my dad was a tinkerer. He loved gadgets and he loved tools. And so one of the things that he had just gotten was a soldering iron. He was so pleased with it. He was looking all over for things that he could solder together. And one Saturday afternoon, it was raining, but he decided that the way to handle this, to keep us busy, keep us interested, we'd make kites. And he, instead of using wood strips, took metal coat hangers and stretched them out perfectly straight and laid them on the floor so that we could sit there and watch him solder them together so that they couldn't possibly come apart, even to making a little crooked O on the end of every one of those coat hangers so there'd be something for the strings to go through. He worked all morning on that, and then in the afternoon we took the Charlotte Observer and spread it out on the paper, put the coat hangers, now kites, on the top, and cut out the forms, which would be the kite backs. He called Louie, I need some rags, and she went into a bag and pulled out scraps of material, pieces of towel, pieces of sheet, and they stripped them into short strips and then tied them together to be the tails of the kite. And if all went well and tomorrow was a good day, it was Sunday after all, we would take those kites and find a place to fly them. Sunday dawned. It looked hopeful. The sky was clear, there was nothing falling down, and the sun came out. And after we'd been to Mass, we got in the car with our kites and we headed out Central Avenue toward country. We were looking for a field, someplace where we could run free with those kites and get them high up into the air. It seemed like a long time, actually, until we found something, but there was a road that was turning right off Central Avenue into an area, a large flat field that was staked off like they were getting ready to build houses there. This looked perfect to my dad. And he just dismissed Mama's objections that this might be some other's property and they might not like us doing that. Don't be silly, this is Sunday, we're not going to hurt anything. He parked and we ran out into the field, jumping over those staked areas and the strings whenever we came upon one, and launched our kites. There was a slight breeze. It was March, but not March winds, and the kites sailed off, taking the news far away up into the clouds. And we ran free all afternoon, launching and relaunching our kites, laughing and having a good time with our parents. Now, at the same time, Mom and Daddy were wandering around, checking things out, looking at the view from a certain place, because Mother had gotten it into her head that they were probably staking out lots for new houses, and that this was going to be a new subdivision. It was out further. It was going to be cheaper out this far, and they could probably afford it on a GI Bill loan. Well, they got that idea. My mother's eyes were sparkling and she was laughing. She wanted out of that apartment so bad. They sailed on that dream all afternoon. And we rode home. 2 or 3 weeks later, we were sitting at supper, and Daddy came in after a day's work and sat down. And he looked kind of sheepish. He had sort of a smirk on his face, to tell you the truth. And then he said, "Louie, I went out Central Avenue today. I rode by that place where we took the kids to fly the kites." "You did? Was there any information up? Did they have a sign up yet about the houses?" He said, "Yeah, there was a sign up, all right." "Louie, they weren't staking out lots. They were staking out plots. That's the new evergreen cemetery." My mother's face fell until she looked at him and they just started laughing. And that would come up every once in a while as I was growing up. They'd remind each other, or we would all begin to remind each other of the day that we flew our kites on the top of what was going to be graves. But we had had a wonderful time. It was a good day to remember. So about 20 years ago, before they needed to, they decided to prepare themselves for the forevers. And Mama called and said, "Ellouise, you know, you're not going to believe what we did this week." And I said, "Well, what?" She said, "Well, here, your dad's just passed by. I'm going to let him tell you about it." And she handed him the phone. "What's Mama talking about, Daddy?" "Well, we went out this week and we looked things over at the Evergreen Cemetery. You remember that, don't you?" "Well, I certainly do." "Well, we bought a plot, Ellouise. We bought a plot, and you won't believe it. It's just about in the same place where your mother had wanted to build a house if we could get the lot. We're going to be in that spot forever. And indeed, today, they are. And whenever I go to visit, I look at them, I think of that day in March when they were young and laughing and happy. And I'm awfully glad that they finally got the house that they wanted. Thank you very much for coming. If you like stories from September through May, every year, we have the stories at Tales in the Village at Friendship Village Community Center in Chevy Chase, 7:30. 2 storytellers a month, always different, free to you. Please come.